Welcome to Bespoken Bones with your host, Pavini Moray, connecting ancestors, sex, magic and science. Pavini explores transpersonal tools for erotic wellness every new and full moon, engaging educators, healers, spiritual leaders and scientists in revolutionary dialogue. Get ready to feel good and go deep. This is Bespoken Bones.
It's a really special Bespoken Bones episode today. This weekend, I went to see a show at Counterpulse in San Francisco called Our Future Ends. And so if you can imagine lemurs and puppets and psychedelic drugs and dance and glitter and film and really banging music and a disco ball and ritual and even more glitter, with a heavy-hitting focus on themes of extinction and loss of connection from our Earth home, and also awkward queer intimacy. At the same time, you are laughing and crying. Well, you have a great imagination. So after the show, I felt completely blown open and blown away. And I bum rushed Clement Hil Goldberg, who is the artist who created the piece, and I asked them to be on the podcast, and they graciously agreed. And so we are rushing this episode out so that you can go see their amazing show. It's really unlike anything you've ever experienced. And I just want to say that I walked away feeling like if they get to spend their life making revolutionary, playful, and brilliant art like that, there is absolutely nothing to stop me from living exactly the life that I yearn to live. So I'm your host, Pavini Moray, and I am absolutely delighted today to introduce you to Clement Hil Goldberg. And Clem is a multidisciplinary artist, primarily working in film, sculpture, and animation to create a fabulous extinction aesthetic. Clement received an MFA in art practice from the University of California, Berkeley, and their work has been exhibited at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive and the Worth Rider Art Gallery, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, Som Arts, Luggage Store Gallery, Artists Television Access, all in San Francisco, and over 50 international film and art festivals, including Frameline, Outfest, Mix NYC, Hamburg International Queer Film Festival, and Cleveland International Film Festival. Clem created the stop-motion animated web series, The Deer in Between, and joined Michelle T. to produce the 20-filmmaker collaborative experimental feature film Valencia. And Valencia won jury awards for the Best Experimental Feature at the Polari Film Festival and Best Narrative Feature at Chicago Reeling. Goldberg was awarded a San Francisco Arts Commission IAC grant in visual arts in 2017, and their project Our Future Ends was awarded a Creative Work Fund visual arts grant in collaborative partnership with Counterpulse in 2016. And you can learn more about the show, Our Future Ends, at counterpulse.org. There's a listing for the show. It's running again this weekend, October 19th through the 21st. And in general, you can learn more about Clem's work at Clement Hil Goldberg. I'm going to spell it for you. ClementHilGoldberg.com, ClementHilGoldberg.com. And again, the show runs this Thursday tonight through the weekend. So hi, Clement, welcome.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me in that beautiful introduction.
So would you just talk a little bit about the show Our Future Ends and in particular, why it's an important framing in terms of the conversation that I have here on this podcast about ancestors?
Let's start with the big question. I'll try to answer that. I was trying to make a project and bring something through that can be connective and sort of, I'm really interested in coalition politics for queers, and when I say that, it includes trans, and I'm interested in this like open, unifying possibility and prospect. And the journey started when I was touring with Valencia with Michelle T, and we had finished that project, but we were taking it to film festivals. I was hearing the same story from queers internationally about being pushed out of their homes, and of course in San Francisco there's rampant gentrification, and it's sort of like we're in this sort of post end stage gentrification. This stuff has been going on since I well, it's just always been going on, right? So I was thinking about that, and then also thinking about climate change and extinction. And I saw this PBS documentary called The Loneliest Animals, and it had sort of all of the like last stop animals that were about to go extinct. And I thought about it doing a project about a bunch of different stories of different animals that were sort of on their way out, and the lemurs caught my fancy. There was something about them, especially since like at the Duke Lemur Center, where a lot of the film in the PBS documentary transpires, they were partnering different species of lemurs together if there was just like one of a certain species left, or and often in zoos as well, there would be, a ringtail lemur partnered with this foca lemur. And I don't know, there was just something so queer about it. And it just felt, and I was like, what is it to be the last of your kind? And just thinking like gender wise and different things, like to be in the margins and not to be reflected en masse on a regular basis. It's sort of, I don't know. I've spent my time on this world trying to make different connections, and I like to dip into and I want to bring that and take my responsibility there to generate queer culture that can be that connective thread. So drawing from the artists and queers who have come before me, and then leaving something behind for those who come after. And lemur seemed like a really great way to do that. And so the project kind of had started there, mostly lemur based. And then I went to my friend Bet Williams, who's this amazing author, her spot in Santa Fe to do some writing. And I had gone there a couple times over the years, but on a particular occasion, this sort of Lemurian thread began to take over, and I had not heard of this lost land of Lemuria, but it was a place that preceded Atlantis, and so I started investigating into this, and this sort of coalesced with I decided to go into graduate school after Valencia and sort of work on the visual arts component of my practice and move forward from filmmaking. And there was a lot coming through in Santa Fe, and I would say that ancestral lineage was strong with the land and the space there, and all these things sort of started to coalesce, and this Lemurian thread was coming through the queer artists that I was with there, and I brought it back to the University of Berkeley where I was studying, and I began to check out books on Lemuria and read about this fabulous place that went extinct, and I just kept thinking about this sort of like, and it was sort of the way these things were framed, and the politics around it, and colonization plays a big role, and it's also like the seat of eugenics sort of spring up here, and also like where sort of this Victorian science moment where those numerical measurements around genitals are created so that people are falling on in different parts of the spectrum, and there's a hard line there. So it's a very interesting place, this Lemurian thread and this Atlantis thread that comes through pseudoscience and then also plays out on the world stage. And I just wanted to cultivate this fabulous root and this like ancestral thread to Lemurians, so that we could have this coalition politic, that we could have this umbrella, something, a large enough framework that everyone who sort of enters the work could have a relationship to these Lemurians who've come before and who have also gone extinct before. And so they're sort of guiding us on, they've been through it, we're going through it. And so it's sort of looking to, I guess, our ancestral models of the extinction experience. And so, yeah, I guess I'm calling in that 80 million year ago ancestral imagined lineage. And of course that comes into the present tense. And I would say, well, you don't know, so I will tell you. Well, I was at Outfest Film Festival. I can't remember what year it was, but Penny Arcade showed this film that is now called Beyond Queer, I believe. It was called something else prior to that. And I think it was around like cultural amnesia, and I'm having amnesia around what it was called. So, but I think it's called Beyond Queer, and she made it with Steve Zettner and Chris Rail, and in it's all of these amazing stories from New York. It was this whole queer river in New York, and all these amazing artists and writers and thinkers and people that I'd never been exposed to before, and I just started crying when I saw that, and that was, I think, this deeper step into this queer river that I, at that point, felt this responsibility to the lineage there. And in working on this project and working around lemurs and Lemurians, the shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando happened. And, I'm not a super religious person, but I will say it felt like, someone coming into a holy site and shooting at my people, and it was this really visceral, it was a visceral response. I think I understood something that maybe more religious people feel or something. I don't know. I guess I can't speak for others. I can just say that I felt a certain kind of visceral response, that these were my relations, and it went into like, as you say, like bones and blood. Like I could feel it on a cellular level. And that became another thread that felt really important in this project, and to set the project in this prehistoric nightclub reality. And also with that, saying and seeing that it is our queer spots that are also in this gentrification thing going away. And so I think it's just the stakes of that and bringing that through. And that's where, past, present, and future collide through art and human and story and dancing and all of that. So I think that's I'll try not to make my responses so long-winded in your future questions, but I think that really lays out the major underpinnings of this project, and kind of hopefully can tie that into the sort of ancestral thing that we set out on answering here.
I could just really sit and listen all day. So no worries. Take the time that you need to really feel like you are explaining and expressing what you need to express, because it's awesome. And it's interesting. So I saw the show, and the folks who are listening won't have seen the show, but like just listening to you talk about it, I'm getting deeper and deeper layers of meaning that feel like, oh, right. I didn't, oh, cool. So that's all happening for me as we're speaking. And I think one of the things that comes to mind is that when I talk with queer and trans folks about ancestors, there's not always a positive response. It's like, oh, I'm disconnected from my family, or that there's brokenness in the family lines, and so it makes it really hard to feel that there could be ancestral blessing or ancestral goodness, like standing behind you. And in terms of the practicality of doing ancestral work, which is genealogy, those experiences, those lived experiences of queerness and transness and otherness, like just get erased, right? Because the genealogy politics are that heterosexual procreative sex that produces children is what gets tracked, right? And so it's easy for us to have this kind of like sense of being a spiritual orphan, especially if we're disconnected from our land base, right? So this idea that you're bringing forth is that this access to our queer and trans ancestors lives in our bodies, right? That we can excavate it, we can mine. I don't want to use that metaphor actually, but we can dive into our own bodies. And you put this in the show by talking about the Lemurians, how they are holding an awareness of their descendants yet to come by embedding these crystals into the land. And I want to frame what I'm going to say next by having you talk a little bit about that context of like embedding knowledge and memory into the land, into our bodies. Talk a little bit about where that came from and your context for that, please.
Sure. I should track back, and I should say that, a lot of this project, I have a couple different threads. I would say biologically, I learned something when my grandmother passed away, who was really very special connection that I was fortunate to be blessed with. And and she was passing away, and I just was like, I wanted to just get her a gift. I wanted to get her something. I was like, I want to get you anything you want. Like, I'll put it on a credit card. What do you want? Anything. And I just like, and there just was no material anything. And I just had this moment where I was like, oh, right. Like, like all that matters is that I'm carrying her irreverence. She was a Holocaust survivor. She had this great sense of humor and was a chanteuse and could sing and only went to school till the 5th grade, but was the smartest lady I knew. And she, in this moment, it was just this thing of like, oh, right, art. Like I carry, she played guitar, she painted, all of it. Like I just was like, okay, yeah, I carry this. But in this sort of setup of this question, about like this direct connection to family and, literal relationships, I have to say, as I'm working on this project, different people come through. Like I'm working on the costumes, and all of a sudden I'm kind of like, oh, that's interesting. That's Klaus Nomi's here, and you're coming through. And so, okay, how do I work with this? And, there's a lot of disconnection because of the AIDS crisis. It's like we're denied. It's not even the biological thing that we're necessarily denied, or through, displacement and oppression and social justice, like all these things that tear queers and trans people away from their families. And it's this other thing, which is this AIDS crisis that happened. That was this fissure, where we're standing at now. It was like losses of all these political decisions that couldn't, be met. And I watched, artists be pushed out of San Francisco, and it's all the result of this. It's that negligence that happened that let people go who would have fought against our present moment, and they're not here to do it. But I hear them. I'm influenced. I have these moments and working on the visual arts for the show and that installation. I was like looking at Andy Warhol's disaster series, and I was like, oh, okay, that should come in, and thinking about Keith Haring and working on the iconography for the symbols in the show. And I think in all of that, and in what I'm saying, to just get back to the archiving of knowledge and the seed crystals and these things, I feel a certain level of futility, because it's like, if we go extinct, what's the point of an archive? And, what is the point of generating queer culture? Like, does it matter? I don't know. But I can't help but do it. And it was just this idea, I guess. Well, I think it comes from the fact that you walk into crystal shops, whether they're in San Francisco or they're in Santa Fe, and there are people like who are selling Lemurian seed crystals, or, you can look for them online and you can get them from China for $1, or there are these ones, from Brazil, or there's all these different sites, right, where these Lemurian seed crystals, this ancient stuff has been mined out, and all of this like goes, it has that level back to Madagascar and the mining that's happening there. And it really all goes back to racism, and it goes back to this moment of this sort of eugenic Lemurian thread that I'm talking about, this Atlantis Victorian colonization moment. So I don't know, there are these overlapping fissures, and I think that this idea that we could embed our knowledge somewhere, I guess figuratively in crystals, but I guess literally, I went to a reading last night. I saw Eileen Miles read, and Kevin Killian and Dodie Bellamy were there, and Margaret Tedesco, and it's all these queer people who mean so much to me and are part of the fabric of San Francisco that are still, they're still here. But of course, Eileen's isn't based here. But it's these readings that bring us together, these moments of sharing knowledge and feeding knowledge to each other. And like I said, my Bet, who I worked on this project at her house, she's going to come out for this project. So I think it's a dire time, and I think we have to feed each other art and thread it together. And then maybe it's just a psychic thing, and it's an energy thing. And if we're not here literally and we go away, it's like maybe just like if the lemurs that have died off, maybe they're still dancing around. One never knows. But I certainly am struck by queer artists and trans artists, and their art influences me, and I want to contribute to that. And I think there's something about living up to that. And so I guess that's this idea, this like underpinning that their seed crystals have been dug up. So here they are, and that's kind of what's happening as a through line in the show. And as you can tell, there's a lot of through lines going on. So I seem to be going on big tangents from your big questions over here.
You're right where you need to be. You said, I can't help but do it. And when you said that, I felt breath come into my body, because I can't help but do it either. And, I went last year on an ancestral pilgrimage to the lands of my people who are mostly Scottish and English. I went to Scotland, and those people had been colonized, of course, by the Northmen, the Vikings, and also by the Roman Christians. And so the ancient Druidic lore is, what's being practiced right now is really a reconstruction, right? But the truth of that, the stories, the myth, like all of the land-based practices of wellness were encoded in the land by the people who were visionary enough to realize the extinction that was happening. Right. And like, I just like when I heard you say, I can't help but do it, I was like, oh, right. Like, it wasn't like there was this big, like group meeting and they were like, okay, so what should we do about the colonization of, of our religion? Like, let's do this. It was like, I can't help but do this. And that to me just brings up, like, we know that there are those who come after us, and we don't know what the future queers and the future trans people are going to be, what the evolution of that is going to be. But we have a sense, right? We have a sense of like, there's something really important here that has to be protected. So thank you. I feel really grateful to be in the company of others who are doing that work. And I wanted to ask you, because it sounds like you are really tapping your queer ancestors. You're paying homage to your lineages, especially in the queer art landscape. But it also sounds like there are, like you're saying, oh, they showed up. And what are your practices as a maker of art around really letting that influence in, around not just like paying honor, but also being in collaboration with those who have gone before you?
Well, I want to answer that, but I also want to say that, something very important to me in filmmaking and in stop motion animation, I've generally worked with queer and trans artists from the outset, and those that are currently alive, and I have the benefit of collaborating with in the present. I try to bring together voices in my artwork that I want to archive, that I think are just the most beautiful, talented people on the planet. And I mean, I think they are queer and trans, but that's just something that's happening. And that's how they've come into my community. But I feel so blessed to work with the people that I get to work with, especially on this project. And so I think, so like working with Brontes, Heather, and Miriam, it's like they have their own spiritual practices and the people that they're bringing into the work and their influences. And so I think in collaboration, I think these things are rippling out much bigger than who I can pull in. And I think it's also through my friends and the people I surround myself with. And, so I think it's just energy. And I think that sort of those collisions of energy and conversations, those are the things that expand the knowledge base of those that came before us. And I think the most direct line I have is through artwork and the artwork I have exposure to, so, and then it's learning about people that, I found queer art and a lot of my queerness through a used bookstore. It was, a long time ago before the interwebs. And so I in that, I sort of I found feminism there. I found queerness. I sort of found my way through books initially, and then found my way out. And I think it's through that journey, I think my spiritual practice has changed a lot over time. It's had a lot of different chapters, and I would say for this project and in this project, I like magic mushrooms. I don't do them all the time, but communing with magic mushrooms has been aiding my work for quite a long while. So I would say that is a big component of my spiritual practice. So anyways, yeah, I think magic mushrooms open doors that are really helpful, and so that's important. And then as sort of a more, I don't know. Well, okay, so Counterpulse is this really incredible venue. It is across the street from where Compton's Cafeteria used to be, and it's in the Tenderloin, and I did a lot of animating in the basement there. And everyone, it's a very lively space, even though it has no windows. And I was alone in the dark for hours on end. It was concerning to Julie, the artistic and executive director there. But stop motion's really talking about like not being able to help oneself from doing something. It's a very stupid art form, very slow. But I did not feel very alone in that basement, and while I was animating, the root of lemur, and this is something I probably should have mentioned at the outset, is that the root of lemur and Lemurian is ghost. Like that's what that word comes from. And so that was very present. And during the time of animating, the ghost ship fire happened in the East Bay. And I felt a responsibility in that, even though I didn't have a one-to-one connection with people who passed on, but I definitely my closest loved ones did, and and so I think I tried to just honor them by making this art too. These things aren't far outside of my thought. The people that are gone, I don't know. I think we're all just sort of carrying this torch in a way, and I think as the stakes sort of change, those relationships where they're not on the ground. Another thing I don't, sort of the story of the ghost dance, and the sort of tipping balance idea of there's more gone than are on the planet. I think. I hope that doesn't befall the queer and trans community, that, there's like 4 left. I don't know, I really don't know where things are headed. But I do think that we've seen a lot historically. We know where a lot of these stories go. And it's sort of trying to break these cycles and find a way to not repeat these things. And I don't know if they're preventable. And I don't know if this is just the story and this is what happens and we just live it out. So I just try to be quiet, and when I'm working on things and I see things, a certain, like I said, I was drawing costumes, and I think it was sort of the shape of the chalice I was working with for the show. There was something that maybe it was the black and white, whatever it was sort of, I don't know. I don't know how I knew Klaus Nomi wanted to be in the project, but it just was there, I don't know what that means when people show up. Through what I'm working on. I think maybe it's just like recognizing and giving credit to influence when you see it. If there's something more than that, I'm not really sure. So I don't know. I think, what is my practice and how is this functioning through ancestors? I don't know. I think I might need another prompt because I've sort of wound down on whatever I was saying. I've kind of lost the plot a little bit.
No, I think you got it, actually. Which is, it's, first of all, really hard sometimes to articulate these practices that we're just doing kind of out of instinct, right? It's like maybe something that's rising up and we can't even, like, how did you do that? Well, I don't know how I did that. I just did it, right? I just knew how to do it somehow, right? I just knew how to open myself to the possible support of these particular ancestors who were showing up in the basement of Counterpulse, which I want to say is also a historic venue, right, for queer art and sex work in San Francisco. So it doesn't surprise me that you didn't feel lonely in that basement. And I also hear something, a couple more things that I want to just tease out. One is the kind of despair, hopelessness, dire futility thread. And at the same time, holding the, well, all those things might be true, and we might be experiencing a mass extinction in the near future of our species. And at the same time, I'm going to continue to make art for the sake of an archive of queer embodied knowledge, right? And I think that that's really important, that you're holding both of those truths. It's not like, oh, I have to be one of these or the other, because they're both true, right? We don't know, as you said several times, like we don't know what's going to happen. And we can hold all of that in our bodies. I think that's part of the, like, our superpower as queers, is that we have to hold all these complicated, paradoxical truths, right? So yeah, it's awesome. And I just wanted to share a little bit, if it feels okay, what happened for me at your performance, because it was profound. And it's that, I have a commitment to this place that I live, to the city of San Francisco, to the spirit of San Francisco. And while I was at this performance that was very much based around the themes of things that I'm working with, including place, including queerness, including, extinction of my people, I felt San Francisco being like, hey, pay attention, right? Pay attention to me. I want more of your attention. And that's also something that I heard in your answer to the question of, like, how is my art practice informed by ancestors, is that there's a currency of attention. There's a way you are allowing your attention to be pulled into dialogue with the ancestors, which is, of course, both an art and something that anyone can learn to do. Yeah. So I just want to see if there's anything else that you want to say before I give folks more info on how to go see your show tonight.
I joke with my friend Ann Walsh. We joke that, like, I make, art for 6 people. I think that, like, a lot of the people that I would like to show this work to, and I would have liked to come into the world learning from and seeing their work, like, they were going away when I came in. It's like there's this uncanny timeline between where like half the wildlife of the planet is gone, and I guess like 2/3 will be gone by 2020. But it starts in like 1972, like and it runs through. It's this timeline that weaves around the AIDS crisis and this loss of wildlife. So that was sort of this partnering of wildlife and wildlife, and so that's sort of where I come into the fabric. And I think there's this feeling. I feel like I'm, spoiling the show a lot, but one of the major reflections is just like being here to watch it go. Like, that's the timeline. And I look at the youngings coming in and I'm like, man, good for you, little spirit. Like, you're coming in now. Like, good luck. I'm glad I got to come in. And I got some of that stuff. And I got some more of that stuff before it went, and I also recognize that the current cruelty that we're experiencing, I feel like the Republican Party, the conservative, this line has always been cruel. Just thinking about the AIDS crisis, it's that time was a very it's that unnecessary loss thing. And I think that's what is also going through. And I think I can address things through humor. I guess that's how I've always just kept going, is through humor. And it's a dark humor, it's sort of that darker humor. But and the beauty. And I like to comment on the beauty of queer and trans people too, I guess. But I don't know. I don't feel right pulling from any particular, I don't know that I want to pull from anything in particular as much as I would like to be connective and generative. I don't want to appropriate And I try to avoid that as much as I can, and then give credit if I see something that's like strongly hitting the work, that should be noted. I think I don't have a right to a lot of things, and I just was trying to find a way to create some kind of ancestral lineage that we could all claim, that it could kind of relax boundaries, and while at the same time acknowledging how we have these structures that we have, and how we are standing where we're standing in this major period of loss that I don't see coming to an end quickly. I mean, a happy one anyways. I would like to see a course correction. But yeah, I guess I feel like that's probably the only thing I wanted to throw out there. And I would like to take this on the road and bring it around. And I'd like to see some of those queer sites that I feel like are under threat of disappearing too. I mean, they've certainly disappeared in San Francisco, and I moved up here from LA. I was watching a lot of Democracy Now! And I thought I better get up there soon. It's going to be gone. And I always love visiting, and I was always so happy. And there is a spirit up here, and I think there is an aesthetic to San Francisco. And the more people that get pushed out, it's a shame, because it's a beautiful lineage that exists here. And a lot of the people and artists that were up here now in LA, which is funny and fitting, that I got to be here, and now I'm watching them all go away. But yeah, so I don't know. It's just a love note, and it's gratitude. And I wanted to create something that's really staring in the face of what's going on, but also can, uplift and be a gift to the community, and to like create some art where people can just really step into it in any way they feel like, and just take a journey, and be there for the magic that Brontes Purnell, Heather Maria Oxen, and Miriam Farnes Rostami create on that stage every night. And then you get to hear the voices. I guess, we can maybe put the credits of all the different voiceover actors that are in the piece, and all the wonderful musicians and lighting design and all of that. We should attach with the podcast, so people can see that this is a collaboration and it's not just me. So, and it's also a collaboration with San Francisco and the venue of Counterpulse, and all the spirits in the city, that wanted to show up. I think there's a lot coming through here, and the audience brings their own bag of bones and blood to the show. So I hope interesting people keep coming out, because that really makes it different each night. So yeah, I think that's all I want to add, and just say thank you so much for coming up to me after the show. It's really nice to talk to you. I hope I've said some good things today. I don't know.
You're great. You're fantastic. It's been amazing. Yeah, it's just been such an honor to get to talk to you about your work, and to hear more and connect more with you. And I'm so grateful that we were able to do this today. Yeah, and so I just want to, again, direct people to your personal website, which is clementhilgoldberg.com with one L, H-I-L, Clement Hil Goldberg, berg.com, where you have more information about your work, but also to go to the Counterpulse website and get tickets for the show, which is running still October 19th, Thursday, October 20th, Friday, and October 21st, Saturday, so that you can all go see this show. Because yeah, it's gonna change, I think, a lot of the ways that you feel about your queer ancestors and queer ancestry. And I just wanted to also, usually I just end here, but I have an invitation for you, my dear listeners, because during my experience of being at this show, the spirit of San Francisco, as I said, was really loudly knocking on the door, and continued to knock until I agreed to answer. And so I'd like to invite you to a pop-up ritual that's happening tonight, Thursday, October 19th at 7, which is going to be in the AIDS Memorial Grove in Golden Gate Park. And, there's a lot of, as Clem was saying, there's a lot of untended dead in this city. And that goes back for hundreds of years, really, especially since the the colonization of and the gold rush, when there was a lot of murder and genocide and enforced slavery and no protection for queer trans people, no protection for sex workers, like all of the most vulnerable populations were really facing a lot of trauma and indignity, and I actually put those things together intentionally. And so what would it be like to help those ones who are beyond the veil, who did die in ways that were not proper, or where they weren't properly mourned and they didn't get the attention that they needed to become ancestors, to become really well in spirit ancestors? What would it be like for us to come together as community and be in service to them on the other side, and to raise energy as gifts for their healing and for their blessing? So tonight there's this ritual, Exquisite Outcast, to tend these dead, to minister to these ones of our own who need it. And I'd like to invite you to come. So 7 p.m. in the AIDS Memorial Grove in Golden Gate Park. Bring a light up candle if you want. And thanks for listening. And I'm Pavini Moray, and we will be back every full and new moon with more embodied goodness and ancestral wisdom.